Hey everybody, welcome back to Emma's Pearls. Today we are here with
Matthew
Godfrey, and we are looking at some letters between Joseph and Emma. And so, do you want to kind of explain and tell us about these letters?
Sure. So we have letters here that are between Joseph and Emma. These are letters that they wrote throughout their life from different periods of their life. We have some from 1834 when Joseph was on the Zion's Camp expedition. We also have some from when he was in Liberty Jail, one from when he was in Carthage Jail, as well as one from Emma in Nauvoo that kind of shows how she was trying to help conduct Joseph's business when he was in hiding from extradition by the state of Missouri. So those are kind of an overview of what we'll be looking at.
Great. And will you show us that first one then?
You bet. So what we have here, this is a letter that Joseph wrote while he was on the Zion's Camp expedition. He was in Richmond, Indiana at this time. He wrote the letter on May 18th, 1834. So Zion's Camp, of course, was the expedition that Joseph led to try to help the saints who had been expelled from Jackson County, Missouri in the fall of 1833. And so he got up a group of men, women, and children. There was about 230 that went with him, and some of them marched from Kirtland to Missouri, another contingent marched from Michigan to Missouri, but they went to the aid of the saints there. And so this is just about 2 weeks into the journey that Joseph's writing this letter. And he says, in the start of it, he says, "My dear wife, meeting being over, I sit down in my tent to write a few lines to you to let you know that you are on my mind and that I am sensible of the duties of a husband and father." So he talks a little bit about what's going on in the expedition and about some family members that were on the expedition as well and how they are doing. And it just kind of shows how he's trying to stay in contact with Emma as he's traveling to Missouri at this time. Towards the end of the letter, he mentions about trying to write to Emma every week on the expedition. Maybe he did that, but we only have 2 letters that survive from his time on the expedition. This one here, and then there's another letter that he wrote on June 4th, 1834, that survives. But those are the only 2 that we have from the Zion's Camp expedition.
That is amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. That's his handwriting there. One of the interesting things with Joseph is he did not like to write himself a lot of times, which is why he employed scribes and clerks to keep his journal and write letters for him and other things. But whenever he was writing to Emma, almost always he would write those letters to Emma in his own hand. He wouldn't dictate those letters. And I think that kind of shows, that he valued that correspondence with her and trying to maintain contact with her even when he was traveling on church business.
And keeping it more personal.
Yeah, keeping it more personal, for sure.
Oh. Did she write any letters back to him? Or do we have anything?
So from the Zion's Camp expedition, we don't have any letters surviving from her that she wrote to Joseph. She possibly could have written to him. In fact, it's probably likely that she did. But unfortunately, a lot of the letters that Emma wrote to Joseph, we don't have today. They haven't survived throughout time. We do have a couple that I'll be talking about here, but not a lot between them, which is unfortunate. We wish that we had more that had survived.
So do you know how we got these? Like how these ones survived and the other ones didn't?
Yeah, so a lot of the ones that we have here, this one in particular and a couple of the others that we'll be talking about, Emma kept in her possession, and then at some point they passed to Joseph Smith III, and then he donated them to the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ, or the Community of Christ today. And so the Community of Christ held most of these documents until last year in 2024 when they sold many of these documents to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So it's kind of a bittersweet thing because we know it was a loss for them, but we're grateful to have these documents in our possession now.
Awesome. That is beautiful. Yeah. All right, what else do we got?
So here's a letter that Emma wrote to Joseph when he was in Liberty Jail. Unfortunately, we don't have the original letter here. This is a copy that was made in a letter book that the church kept. There were 2 letter books that the church had in which they would copy correspondence relative to Joseph Smith or to the administration of the church. And so this letter here that was written on March 7th, 1839, is one of those letters that was copied into the letter book. And so this letter here, Emma talks quite a bit about what she has been through in trying to go from Missouri to Illinois, because of course in the fall of 1838 the Saints are kicked out of the state of Missouri. Governor Boggs issues the extermination order, and so the Saints are forced to leave at that time. Now Joseph is in prison for much of this time, and Emma stays in Missouri until February of 1839, and that's when she departs with the children. And so this letter's written about a month after she has left Missouri, and she tells Joseph about their situation. They've gone to Quincy, Illinois. They're living with Judge Cleveland, she calls him, who was a man who was very generous and opened up his home to Emma and her children. And so the letter just kind of talks about her suffering. There's something at the end here that I think is remarkable too. She says, and I think this is interesting because she says, "I have many more things I could like to write, but have not time. And you may be astonished at my bad writing and incoherent manner," which is interesting because the letter is beautifully written. You know, she writes very well, and there's nothing incoherent about it. But then she says, "But you will pardon all when you reflect how hard it would be for you to write when your hands were stiffened by hard work and your heart convulsed with intense anxiety." And so you can tell that she's suffering at this time. You know, she's without her husband. She's just had to make this strenuous journey in the winter from Missouri to Illinois. She's worried about her children and about their health. She talks in here about how their son Frederick is quite sick at the time. And just that line there about her heart being convulsed with intense anxiety, I think really conveys some of the suffering that Emma had to deal with during her life because of all that happened to the Saints and to her husband Joseph, that she was just as much a participant in those persecutions as Joseph was.
Oh, wow. That is amazing. Are these all letters between or around Joseph and Emma, or just church members?
No, it can be from other church members. Like this one on the following page here is from Don Carlos Smith, written to Hiram and Joseph. There are some in here that are written from Parley P. Pratt, or John P. Green, so it could be a variety of people who are writing to Joseph.
Are any of these from Lucy Mack and Hiram?
I don't know that we have any from Lucy Mack. We do have, I think, a few from Hiram that Hiram wrote to Joseph, but I can't think of any from Lucy that we have in here.
Gotcha. Okay. Can we see any of the other ones? Or?
Sure, yeah. So like I said, here's one from Don Carlos Smith, written to Hiram. Let's see. We have, what else might be interesting here? So a lot of these are written to the President of the United States because church members were counseled to kind of work up their own tales of what had happened to them in Missouri, or their own situations of what had happened. And then you also see that some of these, like this one here, is written to the President of the United States, and it says, you know, those that have signed this letter know that Mr. Rigdon, talking about Sidney Rigdon, is divine connected with the Church of the Latter-day Saints, and so they're kind of recommending him to the president at this time. Let's see, what else might we find here? I think as we get deeper into this, there is one from Hiram, but I don't know the exact page number in there. That one. So this one here is a letter that Joseph Smith wrote to the governor of Illinois, Thomas Carlin. So he's talking in there about John C. Bennett and about John C. Bennett's conduct at the time. This is after John C. Bennett had fallen out of favor with the church. So yeah, just kind of a bunch of different things that are in this letter book here. There's even minutes of meetings. Let's see. Letters pertaining to land in Nauvoo that they were trying to purchase. So just kind of various things that are in here. So.
That's awesome.
Yeah, kind of fun.
Gotta love that history.
You do. We're grateful that they kept this letter book, because otherwise most of these letters we wouldn't have, because we don't have the originals of them. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So this next letter here is another one that Joseph wrote to Emma, and he wrote this one on November 9th, 1839. And at this time, Joseph was traveling to Washington, D.C., and he and Sidney Rigdon and Elias Higbee and others were going to Washington, D.C. to try to seek redress for the Saints' persecutions in Missouri. And so their plan was they would go to Washington, they would meet with President Martin Van Buren, would kind of petition him for help in getting redress. They would also submit a memorial to Congress, asking Congress to step in and provide redress to the Saints. And so they do this once they get to Washington, D.C. Joseph meets with Martin Van Buren. He famously says that he can do nothing for the Saints. He was a states' rights advocate and believed that this was a matter between the Saints and the state of Missouri, and that the federal government didn't have any jurisdiction. And similarly, after they submit a memorial to Congress, Congress basically says the same thing. They said if you want any redress, you have to go to the state of Missouri. There's nothing that the federal government can do. So it's kind of, not successful, this mission to Washington, D.C. to seek redress. But on their way, as they're going there, on November 9th, 1839, Joseph writes this letter to Emma. They're not very far on their journey. They're actually still in Illinois at this time. And the start of the letter talks about why Sidney Rigdon was sick when they started out and couldn't travel very well. And so when they get to Springfield, Illinois, they decide that they need to just leave Sidney there so that they can actually travel to Washington, D.C. and make good time. So Sidney spends quite a bit of time in Springfield, trying to recuperate from his illness. And so Joseph is writing to Emma here, talking to her about their progress, about what they want to do. He talks in here a little bit about family and about children. He says that he is filled with constant anxiety for our families and friends behind. I shall be filled with constant anxiety about you and the children until I hear from you, and in particular manner, little Frederick. It was so painful to leave him sick. I hope you will watch over those tender offspring in a manner that is becoming a mother and a saint. And so he's concerned about Frederick, who again is sick. At this time he was sick when Joseph left, and he's wondering how Frederick's health is. And you can kind of sense why Joseph would be concerned about that, because for many years, the first 4 children, or the first 4 out of 5 children that Joseph and Emma had died before the age of 1. They either died right after they were born, or in the case of Joseph Murdoch, they died at the age of 11 months because of measles. And so Joseph and Emma had suffered quite a bit with the death of
And Don
children.
Carlos, who died at 13 months?
So he
14
dies
months.
as well. Yeah. but this is before Don Carlos
Oh.
passes away. And so you can tell that whenever one of their children would get sick, I'm sure it was just kind of this, oh no, what's going to happen with them. And so he's concerned about Frederick, concerned about his family. So I think this letter is a great example of, Joseph as a father and as a husband, again, trying to stay connected with Emma while he's away from his family.
Oh. Now I'm curious, going into political side of things.
Yeah.
Back then, they said this is up to the state.
Mm-hmm.
But in our day, with all of this going on, wouldn't that actually be federal because of the state coming against Joseph and the Mormons?
Yeah, attitudes about states' rights have changed over time. The federal government has, over time been seen as much more of an intervener in things. And so if something like this happened today, it's likely that the federal government would step in or would not say, well, it's just between you and the state. But yeah, it's just kind of the changing nature of state and federal government.
So they changed that in time, but it was...
Yeah, it's kind of a gradual development over time where the federal government gets more authority and obtains more power. You really see this happen with the New Deal with Franklin D. Roosevelt and other things. So.
Okay.
And it was frustrating for Joseph as well because they had gone to the state of Missouri and tried to get a redress through the state, and the state wasn't doing anything. So I think this was kind of his following the Lord's direction that the Lord had given them in Section 101 in the Doctrine and Covenants about, if something like this happens, then you talk to your local community, to your state, to the federal government to try to get redress for it. And so Joseph's trying to follow those instructions.
And what year was it that Governor Boggs put in that extermination order?
That was in 1838.
1838.
Yeah, October of 1838.
Okay. And at that point, would the federal government then step in if they...
No, again,
No?
Martin Van Buren and a lot of people at the time really believed that the federal government's power was limited and that something like that was something that was between, a local group and the state, that the federal government didn't have jurisdiction over it. And that's one reason why Joseph Smith actually decides to run for president in 1844, because he believes that the federal government is not operating to protect the rights of religious minorities in the United States. And so one of his biggest positions in his platform is that he will protect religious minorities and will not allow their rights to be trampled by the government.
No. Like that.
Yeah.
A lot of people say that's... he's kind of had people trying to kill him a lot of this time because of the Book of Mormon and because of the religion and getting that going. How much of that could have been spurred or ignited more by him trying to run for president?
It probably had some impact, but I think in Illinois, there was so much opposition to Joseph and to the saints that even if he hadn't run for president, I think they still would have tried to kill him in Illinois, which of course they succeeded at. I think a lot of people saw it as kind of Joseph being, foolish or thinking he was big enough to be able to be elected president. And, he was mocked quite a bit in newspapers for running for president. Who does he think he is? He's never going to win, so why is he even doing this? And kind of more like that. I don't think it really led to a lot of increased persecution against him in Illinois.
Okay.
We know slavery also, because he was against slavery. That was a...
Yeah, and his position on that kind of changes over time too, because when they were living in Missouri and trying to be at peace in Missouri, he wasn't as, what's the way to put it? He wrote an editorial that was published in the Messenger and Advocate, where he basically said, slavery can exist. We don't have any problem with it. We're not going to mess with anyone with it. But by the time he runs for president in 1844, that is a part of his platform, that he wants to, institute gradual emancipation of the slaves.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
All right, what else do we got?
So here is a letter that Emma writes to Sidney Rigdon, and she writes this letter in September of 1842. Now, this letter is not in her hand, it's in William Clayton's hand, but that is her signature at the bottom of the page. So that is Emma's handwriting there. And at this time, there are attempts to extradite Joseph back to Missouri. Governor Boggs, there was an attempted assassination on his life in May of 1842, and many people believe that Joseph Smith had ordered this assassination.
At Porter Rockwell?
Yeah, they believed that Joseph had ordered Porter Rockwell to try to kill Governor Boggs. And so they were trying to extradite him to Missouri to stand trial on those charges. Oops.
You have to clap.
So they were trying to extradite him to Missouri to stand trial on those charges. And so Joseph was in hiding for a lot of August and September of 1842. And so as he's hiding, he's not able to really transact business as much as he would like to do. And so this letter here from Emma to Sidney is talking about how Emma has heard that Sidney, who was the postmaster in Nauvoo at the time, is letting other people read Joseph's mail and get access to Joseph's mail. And she's saying, you can't do that. That's against the law to let other people take Joseph's mail, so you need to stop doing that and make sure that the mail is delivered to us and that other people don't take it. And so I think it's a good example of how Emma was willing and able to step up and kind of take charge of Joseph's affairs when he's in hiding, and she was willing to do that. So I like that letter for that reason.
And who was it to again?
It was to Sidney Rigdon, who was the postmaster in Nauvoo.
Oh, wow. That's cool. Okay.
So that kind of shows, doesn't it? So after Joseph's martyrdom, of how Emma took control of the papers and stuff like this and tried to get things taken care of. You can see she's always done it.
Yeah.
It's not a new thing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right, this last letter here is Joseph's letter to Emma that he wrote from Carthage jail on June 27th, 1844, so the day that he was killed. The first part of the letter deals with more kind of the business of the church. He's talking about what Governor Thomas Ford has told him about possibly taking troops to Nauvoo, what he wants the saints to do in that situation. So this part of the letter is not in Joseph's hand. It's actually written by Willard Richards. But at the bottom of the letter, after Joseph signs it there, you see that there's a postscript. And this postscript is in Joseph's hands. And he writes to Emma, kind of more personally, very kind of poignantly at this time too. So he says, "Dear Emma, I am very much resigned to my lot, knowing I am justified and have done the best that could be done." He says, "Give my love to the children and all my friends and all who inquire after me. And as for treason," that's why they were in Carthage jail. They've been accused of committing treason against the state of Illinois. He says, "As for treason, I know that I have not committed any, and they cannot prove one appearance of anything of the kind. So you need not have any fears that any harm can happen to us on that score. May God bless you. May God bless you all. Amen. Joseph Smith." So those are the last words that he writes to Emma, just hours before he's killed at the time. And you can tell he's trying to put her mind at ease, that maybe he is optimistic that they'll be able to get out of this, that somehow they'll be able to obtain a release, because as he said, he knew he wasn't guilty of treason. But of course this wouldn't happen, and just hours after this the mob would rush in and come up the stairs and kill Joseph. So it really is kind of his last words to Emma and to his children. So I think that's pretty special.
Oh, wow. That's a big one.
Yeah.
And I wonder how she got that when all that chaos had happened. And
so Willard Richards, after Joseph is killed that night, he writes a letter to the saints in Nauvoo saying what had happened. And then I think this letter were delivered to Emma soon after. So.
Oh, wow. That's a hard one.
Yeah, you can see that he would have protected that to make sure that it got to where it needed to be protected.
Yeah. And in fact, this letter actually, I think, was sent before he was killed, if I'm remembering right. I think he had someone take the letter before the mob came.
I'm trying to remember, what time was it that the mob came in?
I think John Taylor's watch stopped at like 5:18 p.m. Sorry. So this account here is Joseph Smith's journal from 1835 that Warren Parish kept. A man named Robert Matthews had come and had asked him about how the Book of Mormon came forth. And so Joseph talks about the first vision as part of explaining how we got the Book of Mormon. But when he's talking about the angel Moroni appearing to him, there's a part in here that's interesting. So he talks about how he went out into the field the morning after the angel had appeared. And he says, "On that day, while in the field at work with my father, he asked me if I was sick. I replied I had but little strength. He told me to go to the house. I started and went part way and was finally deprived of my strength and fell. But how long I remained, I do not know. The angel came to me again and commanded me to go and tell my father what I had seen and heard. I did so. He wept and told me that it was a vision from God and to attend to it."
So Angeline's brother was reading this, and he says he wept. His father wept, and he says, "I'm sure that," he says that my father wept. And so he says, "I'm sure that Joseph and his father were weeping together at the being able to talk about what had just happened with him."
So what we have here, this is a page from the original manuscript of the Book of Mormon. So it's kind of hard to see the writing on it, but this is a page that Oliver Cowdery wrote. It's from 1 Nephi chapter 10, verses 11 through chapter 11, verse 1. We don't have a lot of the surviving manuscript of the Book of Mormon. For one thing, Joseph put it in the cornerstone of the Nauvoo house, which was up against the Mississippi River. Not a great place to put paper because water seeped into the cornerstone and destroyed much of the original manuscript. And then Emma's second husband, Joseph Bideman, when people would come visit them, would often give a page of the original manuscript to a visitor as a souvenir. And
It's Louis Bideman.
Louis Bideman.
Louis.
Sorry. So Louis Bideman used to give pages of the original manuscript to visitors as a souvenir, and so that disseminated it all over the place. So unfortunately, we don't have a lot of the original manuscript, but that is a page from it. And then this is a page from the printer's manuscript of the Book of Mormon, the copy that Oliver Cowdery made that was actually taken to the printer so that they could print the Book of Mormon. So that's fun to see as well.
And that's
And then we have a 1830, a first edition of the Book of Mormon, right there. So there aren't very many of those in existence anymore. So that's kind of fun to see too.
wow.
Yeah,
Do you know who owned that one?
I don't off the top of my head. Yeah. And then these are collections of Joseph's Revelation. So the Book of Commandments is the first compilation that the saints tried to make in 1833. Printing of it was interrupted by the mobs attacking William W. Phelps's printing office. But that's the first attempt. It's a very rare book. You can tell how small it is too. Again, they were hoping that missionaries would be able to take these out as they were going to preach the gospel. And then the first edition of the Doctrine and Covenants was printed in 1835, the second attempt to publish a compilation of Joseph's revelations, and so that's the 1835 edition there.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, kind of fun. There's a lot of great stuff that people can come and see in the church history library.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. And what was in that case?
So here we have a couple of important documents pertaining to Joseph Smith. So this is Joseph's 1832 history. This was his first attempt, or at least the first attempt that we have of him putting down his experiences in the Sacred Grove and with the visitation of the angel Moroni. And so much of this is in Joseph's handwriting. Frederick G. Williams also copied some of this as well. But this is kind of a treasure, again, the earliest history that we have from Joseph Smith describing his experiences. And this is opened here. Sorry, as the light goes off. I'll try to get back on. There we go. This is opened here, I think, to his account of the first vision. And it kind of goes along with the second document here. This is Joseph Smith's journal. This is from 1835. This is not in Joseph's hand. This is in the hand of his scribe, Warren Parrish. But Joseph had been visited by a minister, Robert Matthews, who had asked him about how the Book of Mormon came to be. And Joseph began his account with talking about the first vision. And as he talked, Warren Parrish copied his words into this journal here. And so this is another account of the first vision that Joseph gave in 1835.
Wow. Those are just...
So this here
prints.
is the first edition of the Pearl of Great Price, which included excerpts from the manuscript history of the church that Joseph began in 1838, again talking about the first vision. And then two contemporary pamphlets, one written by Orson Pratt in 1840 that talked about the first vision, and another written by Orson Hyde in 1842. This one is in German because Orson was on his way to Jerusalem to dedicate that land and had stopped in Germany and issued this pamphlet in Germany in the German language. So that's kind of interesting. So again, just other accounts of the first vision.
Wow, that's amazing.
In 2005, we had gathered the Joseph Smith family for the very first time here in Salt Lake. And as we were doing so, we came to the church's historical department and asked them for any kind of help that they could give us on any kind of history papers on Emma, on Joseph. And Sherilyn Howcraft said that she would look into it. Well, she got a hold of us and she said, I have all these papers. Do you have a budget? And so we said, oh my goodness, we don't have a budget at this moment, but we'll get back with you. So after meeting with Sherilyn, we went back home to Alpine. And as we went into the door, we could see that our answering machine was going off. And so we went to the answering machine, and when we turned it on, there was a man named Scott Harmon from Texas. And he says, I read about you in BYU newspaper, and he started to cry. He says, I feel I'm supposed to help you. So we called him up, and he says, I am a publisher, and I am able to make copies, anything you need. And here, just after Sherilyn Howcraft is asking us if we have a budget. And so we're grateful for him, and we called up Sherilyn and said, we do have a way. And so Scott Harmon and Sherilyn got together, and she was able to send all the paperwork there. So here, this paperwork is what ended up. So Scott Harmon and his dear friend Scott Stebbing worked on this together at their cost. And they put this together that would have all the papers that Sherilyn had been able to put together of Emma's letters, of Joseph's letters, of all kinds that we as a family would be interested in. So in 2005, we were able to give this packet to each of the Joseph Smith descendants. And then later, what did I do with the other paper? This? Okay. Then later, this one was done in the year 2007 when we had our reunion. And again, Sherilyn helped us to have all kinds of letters that were written. So we have Emma and letters that Emma had written to, and Joseph Smith III had taken, that we would be able to have these records. We are so very grateful for record keeping and how that the Joseph Smith papers has so much in everything that we could ever find. We're grateful for their help.
That's what's so important about family and history work and journaling and keeping up with the information about your family. And I mean, I've been trying to gather all of our histories and current histories, and so if we have more Joseph Smith Jr. descendants, or even Hiram or Samuel, Joseph Smith Sr. descendants, we would love to hear from you. So just reach out to me and we can get your histories as well. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for Emma's Pearls, and we'll talk to you next time.